Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beneath the Silence, Healing the Wounds of Betrayal Trauma. Today, we have a wonderful guest that we're going to have a discussion regarding coercive and covert control and how that impacts everyone. So, as I did the podcast a couple of weeks ago on coercive and covert control, um, just as a reminder, this is patterns of harm that often sit at the core of whether that's intimate partner violence, perpetrator violence, betrayal trauma, and long-term relational injury, yet are frequently misunderstood and often, very often, minimized. So many survivors are left feeling confused, self-blaming, and ashamed, not because they missed something obvious, but because these forms of control are designed to stay hidden. This conversation centers around survivor safety, clarity, and accountability. It is not about blaming victims or pathologizing survival responses. It is about naming systems of control, understanding perpetrator behavior, and restoring dignity and truth to those who have been harmed. At any point, if you need to pause, take a breath, step away, please honor what your body needs because this is a really heavy topic. And so you do what you need to do for you. So as we begin, I would love to welcome once again Bethany Jantzi. And I'm going to just as a reminder, Bethany has her Master of Science in Psychology of Coercive Control. She is a cult and coercive control consultant and mental health professional. Bethany is passionate about helping people understand the intricate mechanisms of coercive control and believes that every person has a right to live free from coercion, abuse, and control. And wherever there's coercion, there is abuse and there is control. Her research explores cults and high control groups and the weaponization of religious text as a form of coercive control against women. Other areas of interest are trauma coerced attachment, grooming, and that grooming is that psychological abuse, and adult clergy sexual abuse. Bethany's writing has been published in the academic journal Priscilla Papers, as well as Mutuality magazine. So welcome, Bethany. Thank you for coming back. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Sandy. I'm excited for the conversation that we're going to have today.
So I thought we would start out with just asking, the question, when we talk about coercive control, I have my notes here that I'm looking at, everyone here. What do people most often misunderstand? And how does that misunderstanding harm survivors?
Yeah, I think there's a common misconception that coercive control is only something that happens in an intimate partner relationship, but really that those mechanisms of power and control and how they function can happen in any kind of relationship that's marked by a power imbalance. So whether that is a clergy and their parishioner, even familial coercive control, so whether that's a parent and a child, or even like we were talking about before, like a boss and an employee, it can even happen in the workplace. And so, yeah, I'd love for people to take this conceptual understanding and understand how it can be applied to any relationship that's marked by a power imbalance.
Right. And it's not just an intimate partner violence conception. And that's why when I did the podcast on intimate partner violence, I also said perpetrator violence because it is that violence exists across the board, regardless of the type of betrayal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wherever there is perpetrator betrayal trauma, there is often coercive and covert control. And that's
Yeah. And
psychological
even
abuse.
that like coercive control is really what's essential to perpetuate and extend the abuse. So it's that control that keeps that victim from understanding what's happening and from being able to free themselves from this person. And so you can have acts of abuse or abusive incident, but it's that coercive control that will always be present if there is a long-term relationship where there is abuse.
Right. And we're talking about not just a long term, as in a number of years. This happens over days, weeks, months, and years.
Yeah.
And so someone may be at a job for a 6 month period of time, and within a month, this control was happening,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? Okay. So I've got, again, just some talking points here that I'm looking at my notes. So in your experience, how does coercive and covert control work together? Like I know they're pretty much married. In whether that's intimate partner violence, perpetrator violence, we can just say perpetrator violence because intimate partner
Mhm.
violence is perpetrator violence. Particularly in those relationships because of deception,
Yeah,
right?
that covert control is such an important part of coercive control. And if we looked at someone who is clumsy in their execution of power and control, who is not sophisticated, they won't use that type of manipulation and deception that we see within covert control. And it's that manipulation that really makes it so difficult for the victim to understand why this is happening. So yeah, covert control and coercive control, they really have such a complex interplay between them.
Mhm.
And I think that we definitely do it justice by addressing like both of these things at the same time. Because if you or I sat down at a table with an abusive person who's berating us and is threatening to throw a glass at us, we would be like, see you never. But over time, that covert control and that manipulation
Yeah,
is what makes us doubt ourselves and maybe we're overreacting or maybe we're being too harsh and judgmental of this person across from us. So
yeah,
yeah, that covert nature of it is really going to be a part of any kind of ongoing abuse.
yeah. Can you give some examples of coercive control, and covert control? I can give some covert control
Yeah.
other ones from my
So
experience.
I think an interesting one that I see a lot is this shift that happens where whenever the victim takes issue with the perpetrator's actions, with what they're doing, um, they're always made to feel like it's not okay that they said ouch. So they can say they can't say, um, you hurt me. They're never allowed to say ouch, like this impacted me, this harmed me. And so there's this sense that it's very invalidating. They're not even allowed to talk about their own experience because it's just quickly manipulated and they're made to feel like it's just not acceptable for them to bring forward what they experienced. And so they're really just, yeah, they're not allowed to say ouch. They're not allowed to complain in any way about any kind of behavior that they're experiencing from that person.
Yeah,
Whereas in a healthy mutual relationship marked by equality and care and growth, you're always allowed to give feedback
yeah,
about like what was hurtful for you or what you found that kind of trampled on your feelings in some way. But in coercive relationships, that's really not allowed. But that might not be something that someone would necessarily identify because it's a very covert, manipulative way to make someone feel like their own experience is not valid.
right. So I know when I did the podcast on this a couple of weeks ago that many, like think the coercive control is the yelling and screaming, and it can be that part of that. It can be the control about where you can go and where you can't go, and trackers or on their
Mhm.
vehicles or on their phones, on the survivors' phones and stuff that, right? It can be financial. It can be control over, access to finances or how much someone spends. But it can also be, um, you know, the perpetrator can give punishing silence. And I didn't realize this was coercive control in my own relationship,
Mhm.
that if I didn't do what my now ex-husband wanted, he wouldn't talk to me for days.
Mhm.
He wouldn't eat with me. He would usually go out to the garage and do whatever, but he wouldn't talk to me. And I always thought that was a component of covert control for years didn't even think it was part of the control. So it was shocking to me
Mhm.
that that withdrawal, that punishing silence was part of coercive control.
Yeah. And that's the subtlety that I think a lot of people miss.
Yeah.
And what you just described is so common, this way that the abuser really weaponizes their moods and their emotional state
Yeah.
in a way that sends a message, you're to blame, you caused this,
Yeah.
don't do this again, or else I will withdraw from you,
Yeah.
and continue to like weaponize my mood. So we see that a lot. And even like what you just said a little bit earlier about like not having access to financial resources or being told that they can't leave or having a tracker put on them.
Yeah.
Um, we even see like more sophisticated manipulation, so like more covert manipulation where the person will never say you're not allowed to leave, you're not allowed to see these people. But when the victim leaves the house, they are bombarded by text messages, by phone calls,
Right.
or the person has some kind of crisis and they need their help. So then they learn over time that it's just not worth it to try and maintain these relationships. But
Hmm.
yet, if you ask them, does this person forbid you from leaving the house? They'll be like, no. But they just make it so difficult that it's just not worth it.
Right. I
Yeah.
just had an aha moment when we're talking about
Hmm.
financial things. Again, my own experience. My ex-husband had his mutual fund license. He didn't sell to anybody else, but he did all the investing.
Hmm.
And it was after finding out about his addictions and first affairs, within a couple of weeks, I found out that there was no money left in investments. I had asked him for years for passwords, like, where is the money? Like, I had no idea. And he would always, oh, I'll get that for you. I'll get that for you. Why don't we go watch a movie? Or do you want to play a game of cards? Like, I don't want to write it all down now. And then I
Yeah.
would forget for days, weeks, or months until something reminded me, like, hey, you were going to tell me where those were. If something happened to you, I have no idea where this money is.
Mhm.
I had no access to it. I didn't know how much was there. And I trusted him.
Yeah. And I bet looking back, you can see how your partner weaponized that trust and used that against you. So you were operating in good faith, being like, okay, I guess maybe he just wants to spend time with me, or he just
Mhm.
distracted, doesn't want to dig up that information yet. So you were assigning to him good faith, good intentions. But
Yes.
really, he was just manipulatively deflecting you and distracting you so that he wouldn't have to give you what you wanted.
Right.
Mhm.
And I didn't realize, wait a minute, that was coercive control.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like
Like, hmm.
this is such an interesting way that abusers kind of control time
Hmm.
and the way that victims experience time and how they don't have ownership over their time. So,
Yeah.
like, you can never put the rubber down to the road in a way that would entice him to give over the basic information that you were seeking without having massive pushback from him.
Mhm.
But he was showing you, like, I will control this. I will tell you when it's okay time and when I'm willing to hand this over. But it's so much more subtle than that. So it's
Hmm.
just hard to put your finger on and to even recognize that that's a mechanism of control.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that's the hidden component of it. And
Yeah.
here, all these years later, I just, even doing the podcast, I just had that like, holy shit moment.
Yeah. And like, what do you think would have happened if you would have been like, actually, I've asked you so many times for this,
Hmm.
and I would really just like that information because I'm concerned that if something were to happen, I wouldn't have this. So can we please just prioritize this? Would you mind go getting that for me? What do you think would have been their response?
Now, I think he would have gotten very, very angry.
Yeah.
And like, you don't trust me, like, I'm
Mm,
tired, you're asking me, like, I know you've asked, I'm going to get it for you. Can we not just go watch a movie? Or can we
yeah.
not just play a game of cards?
Yeah. Or like, and that's just such a interesting way to trivialize like what's important to you and what you're asking for,
Yeah.
and to make him the person who has the trump card. He will decide when and how,
Or if.
if you ever get what you're asking for. And even with some of the people that I've worked with, I can almost imagine their partner's response to be like, "You are so obsessed with this. Why are you so fixated on this? I told you I would give it to you.
Mhm.
Why can't you just believe me that I will give that to you?" Like, I can literally see that how that would play out for some of my clients who have like a pretty good idea of the psychology of the abuser. Is like it would turn it into an attack when like you're just asking for something like, yeah.
And which goes then to why coercive and covert control are so married together, because part of the covert is lies of omission, and that's not sharing passwords or where things are,
Yeah.
right? Like telling me he's going to give them to me, but not. Saying half truths. It's, I'm not going to go into all of it's shifting the narrative. It's all of those things that we just talked about. It's all those things. Okay. Let's the next thing, and I know a number of clients have said this to me, that they have been told they're trauma bonded.
Hmm.
So, and I realize that many survivors of betrayal trauma are told they're trauma bonded, or do some research and come up with trauma bonded. They must be trauma bonded. I don't, just like codependent, I don't prescribe to that definition or that label. I also don't prescribe in betrayal trauma to trauma bonded, because it's typically about safety. So why is the trauma bonding framework often inaccurate, most often harmful, when applied to especially what we're talking about, the coercive and covert control?
Yeah, so the phrase like trauma bonding, and I will totally support someone if like they come to me and that is what really validated their experiences, that understanding.
Mhm.
But I will try to nudge them a little bit to see how that phrase, it really points to a mutuality and an equality that isn't there. So it
Yeah,
makes it sound like both people are equally bonded,
yeah,
and it totally renders invisible the huge power disparity that marks this relationship.
right.
And so I really prefer the phrase trauma coerced attachment, because that really lays bare the coercion that is at the heart of this, and how this is a type of attachment that is fostered when there is really a sense of psychological captivity and entrapment, and that that person's choices have been constrained over and over and over again. And
Mhm.
so, as a way to manage their safety, they develop this very specific type of attachment to
Mhm.
the abuser.
Mhm.
So, I'm with you in that the word like trauma bond and trauma bonded, I don't feel like it totally accurately captures that. And it makes it seem mutual, and it doesn't capture that coercion piece.
Yeah. So this, and I think that's what's really important, is that we move from, and I think that this discussion is having that, we move away from survivor blaming.
Yeah.
And because when it's about safety, it is that trauma coerced attachment there, and it's a unhealthy power imbalance that is happening. And again, regardless of who the perpetrator is, in an intimate relationship, or like we said, clergy and parishioner, boss and employee, parent, child,
Yeah.
sibling to sibling, you know,
Yeah, we
whatever that
even
is.
see this in relationships that are devoid of any kind of like romantic entanglement. So, Robert Lifton's research on prisoners of war, and the psychological processing and behavioral conditioning that they experienced
Mhm.
led to this trauma coerced attachment. And there was no sense of romantic entanglement behind them, but really what it was that totally shaped their mind and their attachment in this way was this intermittent, like rewarding someone and then punishing them. and the victim never knowing what would happen next. And so it really cultivated this immense dependence on their captor and a sense of loyalty to them and a defensiveness about them. Um, and so, and that relationship didn't have, yeah, romantic kind of foundations to it. So I agree, we need to help people broaden this framework to help them understand.
And I wish I can remember who I was listening to. Um, she's a criminal investigator, like an analysis. Um, I can't remember her name, and that's awful right now. But anyway, what she was talking about was Stockholm syndrome. And what you just talked about was Stockholm syndrome, which actually doesn't exist. It's not that they're agreeing with the perpetrator, with the abuser. It's all about safety and
Yeah,
having to do what they are told. And if the perpetrator says, the sky is green, even if it's nighttime, the survivor is going, yep, the sky is green. The sky is green. And the
yeah,
sky is green, everyone. The sky is green
yeah,
in order to remain safe. And that's about
yeah,
survival.
yeah,
Because when they're taking out of the situation, they were terrified.
yeah. And um, it's interesting because trauma coerced attachment can create like a pseudo identity in a person that
Mhm.
once they're removed from that captivity and that psychological entrapment, their
Mhm.
true identity can come through. But in these environments, that perpetrator, that abuser systematically dismantles that person's sense of self and their connection to themselves
Yeah,
and introduces fear and threat and unpredictability so that how that person is able to regulate any sense of emotional safety is to attach to that person and to have that person define for them
right.
their world and their reality. But like you said, it's a survival adaptation where they're constantly managing their safety. And so it's not a yeah, it's we cannot blame victims for having this developed and fostered in them because it's
Mhm.
intentionally fostered within them,
Right.
within this environment of constrained choice and threat.
And
Like,
in that
yeah.
psychological abuse component. Yeah, absolutely. So I know we already really talked about this. I was going to ask the question about how does framing survivors as trauma bonded shift responsibility away from the perpetrators? And what does a perpetrator focus lens reveal instead?
Yeah, it's totally that this attachment has been intentionally cultivated using a very complex interplay of reward and punishment, where that victim is always kept off balance, never know what to expect. And so attaching to this person is how they manage their safety. And so trauma coerced attachment, it puts that blame right where it belongs, which is on the perpetrator.
Yeah. And it's then we are able then to focus on the perpetrator patterns, whether that, there's always grooming
Yep.
of some sort, the perpetrator patterns and their entitlements,
Hmm.
right? And their choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
Absolutely.
that's the key. Okay.
Yeah.
If we can move still onto this, but talking more about that attachment injury, but can you speak to how fear, confusion, and that attachment injury, rather than the bonding,
Okay.
explain why survivors may stay, hesitate to
Yeah.
leave? And when I
Yeah.
say stay, that may be stay within the religious organization.
Hmm.
We stay at the job site. We stay in the relationship at like a intimate partner relationship. So when I say stay, I'm talking about perpetrator, okay?
Hmm.
And hesitant to leave and struggle with clarity.
Yeah. So they will stay. It can be so hard and difficult to get out because so that perpetrator or that system, that ideology in the case of like high control religious groups or cults, that ideology, it supplants that person's own perception and it supplants that person's view of the world and their view of themselves. And
Right.
so you can only imagine how difficult it is to think that life could look differently when your whole perception of everything has been controlled and manipulated by this person or by this system. And so the only thing that is safe is to learn how to function and adapt within that system. And so when you have space from that system, or even when you have doubts or think critical thoughts about that person or the system, it can create this tremendous sense of threat to your body and to your nervous system because those thoughts are not allowed. You cannot have space away from this person because they are the person that defines your reality. And so you'll just be floating off in no man's land, even like physiologically, to try and step away from this system. And so there's just a tremendous sense of fear and threat that happens when you start to even think about separating from that person or that system.
Right. And therein lies where the psychological abuse is so incredibly damaging, for all survivors of betrayal trauma. That psychological abuse, there is so much control in that psychological abuse.
Yeah, there really is. And it's invisible. Like
Yeah.
people can't see it. It's not like a broken leg or like a head injury.
Or
And
a punch in the face that, somebody's got a black
yeah,
eye, right?
yeah. And it's such a gradual process that psychological destabilization and replacing that person's perception
Yeah.
with the perception and reality of the person with the power and control.
Yeah.
That it's you don't even really realize that you're being incentivized to abandon yourself and to take on this system.
Yeah.
Because if it was so clear, we wouldn't have this be such a common experience among survivors.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's it's mind-boggling because when we think of intimate partner violence or perpetrator violence, we think of that physical, that hand, that fist, that, and yet the psychological abuse, even if physical abuse, and I don't in any way, shape, or form want to minimize the physical abuse,
Mhm.
it's that psychological abuse is there as well. And even if there's no physical abuse, there is still this violence because of
Yeah,
this psychological abuse.
absolutely. And I love the way that you said that because it is violent. It has such a devastating impact on that person's psyche and on the way
Hmm.
that they view themselves. It
Hmm.
absolutely is violent and incredibly destructive. And so
Hmm.
often they've been trained to blame themselves for so
Hmm.
many things. And
Hmm.
so there's really no way out. Like it's incredibly difficult for them to even have the psychological space that they need to
Yeah.
imagine a different kind of action or response because these relationships are really marked by constrained choices. So they don't have all the options that people in healthy spaces and healthy relationships have. They have constrained choices.
Okay, so that brings me to this next thing, but question for you. How does these control mechanisms undermine a survivor's autonomy and ability to give actual informed consent emotionally, sexually, relationally? We can add all those lees.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
how does it do that? There is no informed consent.
No, because informed consent would mean that they had a full and accurate understanding of the processes that they were subjected to.
Right.
When they don't, they were so covert. There was deception, there was manipulations, there was half-truths, there was
Yeah.
like psychological and emotional pressure applied to them.
Right.
And so to take their response, for example, I think of um, Sean Combs and Cassie Ventura and their case, their legal case that went through, and how the jury got so hung up on some of the loving texts that she sent him. But that's not the full picture. And those little pieces do not point to mutuality, equality, and a loving, healthy relationship when you look at the whole structure That's Cassie's attempts to manage her safety and to placate and to signal to the person who poses a huge threat to her, you don't need to see a threat from me. Like, we're good. Like, we're all good. Like,
I'm going to bring up the Hockey Canada thing
yeah,
with M and with her in that hotel room with
yeah,
all of those hockey players. And they say she gave consent because she said yes, or because, but really, you've got all these people and you're a single woman that is naked, and you've got there is no informed consent. It's coerced.
yeah,
And then to one of them to videotape
mhm,
the consent.
yeah, yeah. Like, that was such a horrifying example of the control and compliance that they expected
Mhm,
from her in that
mhm,
moment. What
mhm.
I want to ask is what would happen to her if she didn't say, "Oh, yeah, let me give what you just demanded me under duress while you surround me and while I'm not wearing any clothes? What would happen if I said no to this?" So, again, she doesn't have her choices are constrained, and she's making the best choice in that moment to manage her safety. That doesn't mean that she consented and that she wanted to be there. She
No,
was operating within very limited and constrained choices.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's like,
yeah,
oh, so what that means, this links this control to consent violations,
yeah,
actually.
yeah,
It
yeah,
violates the consent. There is no consent.
yeah,
Oh, I wish all judges and lawyers and so on could understand this piece.
yeah,
I,
absolutely.
you know,
I like for that case, and then for the Sean Combs, Cassie
yeah,
Ventura case, I just like was my heart was breaking, and I just thought like, ah, if only this jury could have heard from a coercive control expert who
yeah,
is explaining to them what trauma coerced attachment is. It's such a, it's such a tremendous injustice the
yeah.
way that those cases unfolded.
And I know you have to go soon here, so I'm
Mhm.
gonna quickly these next two. So one is, what are the risks of therapeutic approaches that focus on attachment wounds or the relational dynamics without addressing this power, control, and perpetrator behavior?
Yeah, I mean, what you'll often see is that survivors are pathologized and
Yeah,
even like punished or
yeah,
chastised for very natural survival adaptations. And you're just making it even more confusing for them, and you're reinforcing that somehow this is their fault and that they just had like a better response, then maybe things wouldn't have unfolded the way that they did.
right. That they
And
had
so,
equal part
right.
when,
Yeah, and like making it seem like somehow this is like a marriage issue and a relationship problem instead of a problem of power and entitlement to control. And that is the core root of this.
and so that's where the focus needs to be on the perpetrator aware treatment
Yeah,
about this entitlement and this power and control aspect.
yeah, absolutely. Is really understanding these survival adaptations for what they are, that these are adaptations formed under pressure and under duress with constrained choices. Yeah.
So this next question then is going to be two-part as we wrap up. If there's one shift you wish clinicians, advocates, or the public would make when supporting survivors of coercive and covert control, what would it be? The second part to that, what would you like to say to survivors?
Yeah, I would say that it is so essential to understand this framework of coercive control
Mm,
and that the result of coercive control is this trauma coerced attachment. And so, if you're talking about intimate partner violence or domestic abuse or any kind of abuse without recognizing this, you're kind of missing the picture and you're so much more likely to pathologize the victim's own adaptations and not recognize that power and control. So I would just urge practitioners to really familiarize themselves with this concept of coercive control and trauma coerced attachment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So then, what would you want any survivors listening right now to know about themselves, their reactions, and their strength?
Yeah. So I would want them to know that it's not their fault, that they were intentionally put in this position that would forge this type of attachment to the benefit of the perpetrator and the person with power. Um, and that we don't expect people who are dropped into a forest to have all these survival skills because that isn't something that we readily accept just another random human being to understand how to master
Mhm.
that environment. And so we shouldn't expect victims um, to know how to recognize this, A, because it's meant to be difficult to detect, or to B, understand how to extract themselves from it.
Mm,
They were never meant to see this for what it is. They were never meant to see that invisible cage. And so it's not their fault. And this was something that that perpetrator intended as part of their control over them.
right, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as we end for today, Bethany, I want to thank you so, so much for your time and your expertise. And you are an absolute delight to speak to. And like I said, I had that aha moment, and I don't know why it hasn't happened before. It it was meant to be. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for joining me. And everyone, I want to thank you for joining us today on Beneath the Silence, Healing the Wounds of Betrayal Trauma. And remember that healing is possible, even from the deepest, darkest wounds. If this episode resonated with you, please let us know. Leave a comment, send me an email, send Bethany an email. Um, as you know, that there's going to be resources on my website, sandrajoy.ca, my email, sandy@sandrajoy.ca. Bethany, how may people be able to reach you?
So they can go to my website, www.freefromcontrol.ca, and they can reach out to me there. I also do a lot of information on my Instagram, which is freefromcontrol.ca on Instagram, so they can check that out as well. And yeah,
Okay.
I'm happy to hear from them if something really resonated with them that we talked about today. But I'm just really grateful that you're having these conversations. I think it's so important, and this is such an incredible resource for people. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And just a reminder, everyone, Bethany's contact information will be in the description of this podcast. And so you can copy and paste. You don't have to worry about trying to write it down. For those of you listening, if it does resonate with you or you know someone who could use this information, please, please share. It helps the algorithm, but it's about helping others find acceptance and validation and community. And I think that's really, really important as well. So join me next week as we talk about betrayal trauma triggers, and you will find that there is much more to them than one would expect. Okay. This conversation matters. You matter. And until next time, please take gentle care of yourself. And remember, I see you, I hear you, and I believe you. And may I add, we see you, we hear you, and we believe you. Until we meet again.